Howdy folks, welcome back to my World of Tanks replays with the mighty Jingles. Today we're in the garage with the SU-26, the Russian Tier 3 artillery. It's the only artillery piece I have left. I've sold my GW Panther, I've sold my GW Tiger, I've sold my SU-5. SU-26 is the only one I kept a hold of, because it can be a lot of fun. Low tier artillery is nowhere near as overpowered as everybody claims high tier artillery is. And you tend not to get yelled at and abused as much in low tier artillery as you do in high tier artillery. When it's not your fault. Low tier artillery, dumbass low tier artillery drivers who accidentally hit their teammates get yelled at just as much as dumbass high tier artillery drivers who accidentally hit their own teammates or just recklessly hit their own teammates because they don't care where their shells go, and that's fine. They deserve to get yelled at. But you don't tend to find people whining about how artillery has to be asleep in low tier games the way they do in high tier games, and because of that it's still quite refreshing to drive the SU-26. Stat wise, well, it dies in 1 or 2 hits from anything. It only has 150 hit points. It weighs just under 12 tons, but its power to weight ratio is useless. It only has a 130 horsepower engine. Speed limit of 30. Well, yeah, it can do 30, but it needs a run up and a downhill slope to achieve that. It only has a 130 horsepower engine. It turns very slowly, 22 degrees per second, but it does have a turret, and a turret that turns 360 degrees. This is highly unusual for artillery, and it's one of the things that makes the SU-26 so much fun. Now that is a very, very slow turning turret. 12 degrees per second. I mean, that's even slower than the Hellcat turret. That's saying something. But it's practically unique in the game. Certainly at lower levels, even at mid levels, you're not going to find artillery that has a turret that can turn 360 degrees. The GW Panther has a sort of turret, and it has a very, very good arc of fire, but it's nowhere near as good as this. However, the price you pay for that is it only turns at 12 degrees per second. But what it does mean is that you never lose your aiming bonus, as would happen in other artillery if you reached the limit of your gun traverse and then you had to turn the hull, and suddenly the aiming circle would climb to massive sizes again, and you'd have to go through the whole aiming process. You don't have that problem with the SU-26 because the hull stays in position. The turret just rotates, which is great news. Now, couple that with the fact that lower tier artillery tends to have much faster reload and tends to be a lot more accurate, accuracy is the wrong word. It has a much smaller aiming reticle, so the shot, while it might be just as inaccurate as higher tier artillery, isn't going to miss by as much because the aiming reticle is that much smaller, and that means that it tends to be, well, it's the most accurate artillery I've ever used. Even without a 100% crew, it just doesn't miss because you never ever suffer the aiming penalty that you will incur by moving the hull. Once you get into a decent spot, you can just let rip and keep firing practically as fast, as long as there are targets up, practically as fast as the gun can reload. You really hardly ever have to go through that whole aiming process, and that's what makes this thing so fun. View range, well, it's not bad actually. 320 meters, but it is only tier 3. Signal range is actually pretty good for a tier 3. So it's quite a nice little package. Now, if you look at the guns, it has a choice of 3. The stock gun that it comes with is a 76mm howitzer. Forget it. It has one upgraded 76mm howitzer, and to be completely honest, the only real upgrade is the fact that it fires slightly faster. Is it more accurate as well? Yeah, it's slightly more accurate, but it's a 76mm howitzer. They're useless. This is where it's at, a 122mm howitzer. Now, you're going to find a couple of things with these, particularly the Russian howitzers. They have a very, very high arc of fire. The German ones don't really get this until you get to the GW Tiger with its 210mm mortar. Most of the artillery has a relatively flat trajectory when it fires its shell. So you can, if for example most German artillery is shooting at you and you're behind a rock, you're normally pretty safe. But when these little buggers are firing at you, because the shell has such a high arc and literally drops down on top of the target, you need to stick much, much closer to cover to be safe from these little things. And a lot of people don't realise that, and you can hit some very unsuspecting targets with these things in places where they think they're safe from artillery and they really aren't. Now, the gun has some unusual ammunition choices. It has 2 different kinds of high explosive and 1 gold ammo, which is also high explosive anti-tank. The gold ammo doesn't have an explosion radius. There's no splash damage with the gold ammo. It just does around 160 penetration, which is ridiculous for tier 3, and does pretty much exactly the same damage as the other 2 high explosive shells. The only difference between these 2 high explosives for credits are one of them does double the damage of the other one, pretty much, and costs twice as much. But when you're talking about a difference of 75 credits versus 150 credits, there's no reason not to get the second of the HE ammo for 150 credits per shot. They both have exactly the same penetration, exactly the same damage, exactly the same splash radius. Oh, sorry, they don't have exactly the same damage. The cheaper one does half the damage of the more expensive one, but it's only 150 credits, so get this ammo, not that one. And it has a very, very big ammo bin. It can carry 28 rounds. You're going to notice when you get up to tier 4 artillery and they suddenly realise you only carry 14 shots into battle because of the rate of fire of these little buggers. Well, let's have a look at the gun. I'll show you what I mean. Rate of fire, 6.74 rounds per minute. It takes around about 10 seconds to reload this thing. And that's without 100% crew. I hasten to add, my crew are only at 88%. Penetration of the HE is, it's not bad. I mean, 61mm. It's only tier 3. That'll rip open scouts, other artillery, most tank destroyers that you're likely to face. You will have problems with heavy tanks and some of the tier 5 mediums. You ain't going to be one-shotting heavy tanks or tier 5 mediums with this thing. Even if the shell does full damage, 150, seconds, 270 average damage, you'll kill light tanks all the way up to tier 4. You will, all the way up to tier 3. You will badly damage light tanks all the way up to tier 4. Medium tanks, tier 3, tier 4, you will hurt them. You'll have problems if it doesn't penetrate the armour, and 61mm of penetration, you're starting to approach tier 5 medium tank armour limits, and tier 4 medium tank armour limits in some cases. And this thing does not do much damage at all if it doesn't penetrate the armour. Accuracy, well, that's deceptive. It looks like absolutely appalling accuracy, and it is. 0.53 accuracy is absolutely rubbish. But it only has a 4.6 second aiming time. And again, this is without any modules fitted. There's no gun laying drive on this or anything. The crew are only 88%. And because you never have to turn the hull of this thing, because it has a turret, that full 4.6 second aiming time never really comes into effect because you're never moving the hull. And you're usually quite safe from counter-battery artillery fire because low-tier artillery like this doesn't have the range to cover the whole map, so you can't hit enemy artillery unless you move quite far forward, but they also can't hit you. So you never usually have to move the hull to avoid counter-battery fire, which means that 4.6 second aiming time rarely actually comes into effect. It's closer to 3 seconds, just to be 100% sure that you're going to hit the target. Now you say, well, how are you sure you're going to hit the target with 0.53 accuracy? Well, it's because the size of the aiming circle is tiny. It's barely twice the size of a light tank. So yes, it might deviate, it might have lousy accuracy within that aiming circle, but most of the aiming circle covers your target anyway, so it's very difficult. Even if you're not going to hit precisely on the spot where it's aimed, you're probably still going to hit the target because the size of the aiming reticle when it's fully aimed is so incredibly small. So it is a kind of fun tank to play, and I do keep saying I do love playing my tier 2s, my tier 3s, and some of my tier 4s, because the lower down the tier you go, the more a good player has the ability to influence the outcome of the battle. You get more top guns, you get more, you just get more kills, you do more damage because you are a better player in a pool full of newbies, basically. A lot of these guys don't have, I mean, like this, 100% crews. the tanks are not fully upgraded. Even if they're not completely stocked, they don't have all the best equipment, and you do. And so it's very, very easy for a decent player with a fully elited tank with 100% crew to really make a difference in these low tier games. It's not so easy to do that in an SU-26. Because you're artillery, you cannot look after yourself. You can wipe out half the enemy team and still lose, because the second those light and medium tanks overrun the artillery park, you cannot defend yourself and you just die. People in high tier games don't give a shit about their artillery because they hate artillery. People in low tier games don't give a shit about their artillery because they don't know any better. You die to enemy lights and mediums just as much in a low tier game as you do in a high tier game, I'm afraid. And at least if you're running around in a Marder or a T-18 or a T-82, you can look after yourself. You cannot do that in an SU-26 or a Vespa or an M37. That is the unfortunate truth of playing low tier games. And I've been playing a lot of low tier games lately, and I've been having all sorts of fun in my tanks, and I haven't been having the slightest bit of fun in this thing, purely because if your team isn't up to scratch, it does not matter how well you do in one of these things, you're going to lose. And you do not get that in a Marder, you do not get that in a T-18, you don't get it in a Tetrarch, you don't get it in a Panzer 735F, because you can turn the tide of the battle by yourself, even if your team is completely hopeless. You can't do that in artillery. You need your team to protect you. And that's why I'm selling this as well. See you, folks. And when you see the replays I'm about to show you, you'll understand why. Now, and you're going to find this in any low tier vehicle that is fully researched, has all of the best equipment mounted on it, has had some money spent and had some very expensive modules fitted to it, has a fully trained 100% crew. Doesn't matter whether it's artillery, tank destroyer, tank, whatever, you're going to get a lot of kills. And, you know, it's fun. But there's a problem that you only get in low tier artillery, that you don't get in low tier tanks, and that problem is the quality of your team matters.
Enemy armor is destroyed.
I have no idea what that Sturmpanzer thought he was doing. It's entirely possible he didn't realise he has an overhead view and he's running around trying to kill everybody in direct fire mode. But just note, watch this. Oh no, too late. If you're firing at a target who disappears from view range and you see a shot go in but you do not see an explosion, that means you hit him. You don't see the explosion because you can't see the tank that you were shooting at. If you do see an explosion, it's not a direct hit. Just a little tip there for you. Where were we? Yeah. You do rely on your team. You're forced to rely on your team for your own defence. I mean, look at this guy in the Leopard. He's not AFK, his turret's turning, but he's just sitting there, taking no part in the game whatsoever. And it's because of people like this, even though, you know, I've got 50% of our team's kills. But if your team don't protect you in artillery, it does not matter how well you do, because you can't protect yourself. Admittedly, I do get quite unlucky here. This T-46 driver, well, yeah. And that missed, and yeah, well, you can imagine how that one ended. And the team were shit. The team couldn't tell the difference between their arse and their elbow without written instructions and a guide. And that's not such an issue if you're patrolling around the place in a Panzer 735F or a T-18 or a T-82 or anything other than artillery, because you can look after yourself. If you're in low-tier artillery, it doesn't matter how well you do. If your team are completely incompetent, you are just as dead as everybody else on the team. And that can get very frustrating. Now, I get it that artillery is supposed to have limitations, and that's absolutely fine. The fact that artillery generally cannot defend itself, I don't have a problem with whatsoever. You can't have it both ways. You can't rain down death and destruction from one side of the map onto tanks that have no chance of returning fire at you, and still be able to defend yourself against them effectively when they close into line of sight range with you. The advantage should be all on the tank side and not the artillery side in that situation. But that doesn't change the fact that artillery is reliant on their team to not be complete retards for their own survival in order to be able to help their team. That's just the way it is. And I don't have a problem with that, because artillery shouldn't have it all their own way, so that's absolutely fine. But it does mean that when I come down to my Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 games, I come down here for some stress relief. And you don't get it when you're playing low-tier artillery, because your teams are usually a bunch of retards. Now, if I was driving my Panzer 38T, if I was driving my Panzer II, if I was driving my Marder, my T-18, it wouldn't matter if my team were a bunch of retards. I could still have fun, because I'm in a tank, or I'm in a tank destroyer, and they can look after themselves. Artillery, by design, cannot look after itself. And I don't have a problem with that at all. What I do have a problem with is having shitty game after shitty game in mid and high tiers, and then coming down to low tiers and having more shitty games. And you are pretty much guaranteed that most of the time in low tier artillery, regardless of how well you do. Because if you're the last one, if you're the last one surviving on your team in a Marder or a T-18 or a Panzer 38T or a Panzer 735F, you can still win the game. Even if your team are complete blithering incompetence. I'm not saying it's impossible to do that in an SU-26 or a Vespa, but it's bloody hard work.
We finished him off.
So we're up to 3 kills. And this is just going to perfectly illustrate what I'm talking about. Now, in a rare display of intelligence, our T1 heavy tank, I know this is unusual for T1 heavy drivers, but our T1 heavy tank is actually saying, for God's sake, somebody cap. We're winning 6-5. We completely control the area around the cap circle. Somebody, for God's sake, get down there and start capping. But no. Never mind that is the point of this map. Now everybody wants to go and get some kills. Because we're winning 7-5. But we're only winning 7-5 because I'm here. Seven six. 8-6. Oh, hello. Yep, that's right. They've left a flank completely open, and here comes trouble. Now, what do you think is going to happen when the only competent player on the entire team
We nailed it bad.
suddenly has to try to defend himself in an SU-26. T1 heavy drivers yelling cap. And because I'm no longer supporting them, the enemy team have now evened the score.
They're hit. One of our tracks is hit. The track is damaged. We're done for. Everyone get out.
Can you guess how this one ends? Yeah, about as well as you'd expect. Yeah, the enemy team win by capping. And this game illustrates perfectly why I hate playing my SU-26 and why I've sold it. It doesn't matter how good you are in an SU-26. If your team are useless, you are going to lose anyway, because the one thing you cannot do in artillery, despite me leaving that M4 on 1% heat, eventually wins the game by capping. You cannot protect yourself, or it's very, very hard for you to protect yourself, which makes it intensely frustrating when you run up more than half the kills that your team manages in the entire game, and they still manage to lose it for you, because you cannot win the game by yourself in low tier artillery. You can win the game by yourself in a Tetrarch, in a T-18, in a Marder 2, in a Panzer 735F. You cannot do it in artillery. And I play my low tier games as stress relief for when the idiocy of random teams in higher tier games gets too much for me. When I come down to low tier games in a lower tier tank or a lower tier tank destroyer, it doesn't matter how shit my team is. I can still have a good game and I can still win it. You cannot do that in artillery. You need at least 2 or 3 other competent players on your team. You cannot do it all in artillery, and the games get just as frustrating, if not more so, when you're playing a Vespa or an M37 or an SU-26, because no matter how good you are, no matter how hard you work for it, your team are going to let you down. And there's nothing you can do about it. It just leaves you with such a sense of impotent rage. You may as well be playing a high tier game. You cannot influence the outcome. Well, you can. All it took was, I mean, in this game, the team were pushing forward. I was obliterating everything in front of them. I was clearing the way for them. And then the very second bad guys appeared over here, because they totally left this entire flank open, and refused to cap. And the very second bad guys appeared over here, suddenly all their artillery support evaporated, because I had to run for my life and try to fight off a heavy tank and a medium tank, both of them 2 tiers higher than me. And I just couldn't do it. I could have done it in any other tier 3 or 4 than an artillery piece. I just couldn't do it in an SU-26. And of course, these guys, all their artillery support evaporated, and then suddenly, because I was effectively out of the game, and then was actually out of the game, it all went to rat shit. So you can, how do I put this? You can definitely influence the outcome of a game in low tier artillery as much as you can in a low tier tank or tank destroyer, if your team are any good. And they don't even have to be that good, they just have to be barely competent. But good luck getting a barely competent team in a low tier match. That's why you have so much fun in your low tier tank destroyers and tanks, because it doesn't matter that you have an incompetent team. You can still, if you're any good, do it all yourself. You cannot do that in low tier artillery. You need at least somebody on your team to be awake, and they usually ain't, and that is usually the outcome, regardless of how good you are, and that is so frustrating. And that's why I've sold my SU-26 as well, because I get enough stress, rage and frustration in high tier games that I just don't need it when I'm having fun in my low tier games as well, because my low tier games are for having fun. So while this is probably not a very good review of the SU-26, don't get me wrong, it isn't. I mean, you saw how it performed. It is a great little machine, but I won't be playing it anymore because I just cannot take the stress. So that was the SU-26 doing very, very well, and it all being completely pointless anyway in a couple of low tier battles. I hope you enjoyed the replay, because I certainly didn't enjoy playing those games, and I'll catch you next time.